friend, have you ever had one of those days where you are busy from the moment your feet hit the floor until the moment your head hits the pillow, and yet somehow the thing that mattered most never actually got your attention? The errands got run, the chores were taken care of, texts and emails were answered, appointments were booked. You checked things off the list all day long, but still, at the end of it, there's this strange feeling that you've been moving constantly without necessarily getting anywhere. Let's talk about it. Hello, and welcome to Torches, Yoga and Mindfulness. I'm Lauren, and I'll be your coach. If you're curious about mindfulness, healing, and practical habits that actually work, you're in the right place. Here we focus on simple but powerful practices grounded in ancient wisdom and modern science to care for both our mind and body. So go ahead, hit that like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. If you have ever experienced that feeling of being so busy but not moving forward, you're definitely not alone. Today I want to talk about something that I think many of us encounter, especially during our seasons of growth, change, or new beginnings. It's the difference between movement and progress. Because despite what our culture often tells us, they're not always the same. If we can understand that distinction, we can completely change how we approach our goals, our relationships, our health, work, and honestly, just our daily lives. This month, we have been exploring the theme of circulation. We've talked about attention, energy, emotions, our environments, and the way life moves through us. And June carries a certain energy, like the windows are open, the air is moving, the plants and gardens are growing. Everything just seems to be stretching outward. It's easy during times like this to feel the pressure to grow faster, accomplish more, or keep up with some invisible pace we imagine everyone else is moving at. But if we look to nature, she doesn't actually grow through urgency. She grows through rhythms and circulation and consistent nourishment. And I think there is an important message for us there. We spend an enormous amount of our energy moving. We're researching, planning, preparing, organizing, thinking, rearranging, responding, reacting. And none of these are inherently bad. Of course, we have to research and think out a plan and organize those plans or our schedules. And we have to be flexible with those plans and expectations when things don't quite work out as we've planned for them to. And now we have to rearrange things. But sometimes these kinds of movements become a substitute for progress. Sometimes we stay busy because being busy feels productive. It feels like we're doing something, and our brains will actually reward that feeling. Behavioral psychologists often talk about how our brains love completion. Like, when you get a piece of a song stuck in your head, and it just keeps replaying over and over, looping in like a terrible karaoke performance. The brain is trying desperately to finish the sequence to get that completion reward. Because every time we do finish a task or a sequence, like a song or a melody, we get a little reward signal of dopamine. It feels satisfying to be able to cross another item off the to-do list. The challenge is that our brains don't always distinguish between what is important and what is merely easy. We can spend an entire day collecting little hits of accomplishments while quietly avoiding the one action that would truly move us forward. We're all guilty of it. Maybe we've spent hours researching something instead of just actually taking that first step. Maybe we reorganize a project instead of actually working on it. Maybe we've planned a healthier lifestyle a dozen times instead of actually portioning the food on our plate, taking a walk, or sitting for 5 minutes for a breath practice. There's a lot of movement there, but not actually any progress. And this is where mindfulness becomes incredibly practical, because mindfulness helps us to pause long enough to ask a different question. Instead of, what am I doing? We are asking, what am I moving toward? That is a very different conversation. One of the most helpful distinctions I've found is the difference between urgency and alignment. Urgency asks, what needs my attention right now? Alignment asks, what matters most? See, urgency is often loud, and alignment is usually quieter. Urgency likes to pull us off track, while alignment gently guides us on course. And there are telltale signs that we can feel even if we aren't acknowledging them. They are there. Urgency feels like tension, and alignment comes with clarity and ease. Not necessarily that whatever that task or step looks like is easy, but just this ease of knowing it's the next right thing. Now, this doesn't mean we are going to start ignoring our responsibilities or pretend like deadlines don't exist. It simply means that we become more intentional about where our energy goes. Instead of allowing every demand to dictate our direction, we begin checking in with our deeper intentions. We start asking ourselves, what am I trying to create? What kind of person am I becoming? What matters most here? What would actually move this forward? And my favorite question for this season is, what would move better with a steadier breath? I love this question because it immediately softens the pressure. Whether that pressure is coming from a difficult conversation that we need to have, a creative project we are trying to tackle, a health goal, a relationship challenge, or just a decision we've been putting off. What would happen if we approached it with a steadier breath? So you may be thinking, Coach Lauren, just changing the rhythm of my breath isn't going to change the dynamic of a situation or whatever it is you're facing. A slower breath isn't going to automatically fill you with courage. And I don't mean that. What I do mean is that when we check into our breath, we are checking into reality and the present moment. What is actually here, instead of going into it, say a hard conversation, and coming from a place of fear or defense because we've spiraled out on it. Because then the conversation is no longer about what is actually current. It becomes about what we have catastrophized, or just what we've imagined could happen, or what they would say. But when we come back to our breath, we reel all that back in, and then we can address it with clarity with what's actually happening and what the real next step is. So when we begin asking questions like that, like what would happen if I approach with a little steadier breath, we naturally start creating more aligned action. And of course, you know I have some practices for you that can help with that. The first practice is to check your compass. Whenever you're feeling pulled in 10 different directions, pause and ask yourself, what am I moving towards? Sometimes just reconnecting with the direction helps us to stop scattering our energy, because movement becomes much more meaningful when it has a destination. Okay, the second practice for today is finding the next right step. One of the reasons we get overwhelmed or that feeling of being stuck is because we tend to look at the entire journey all at once. We see the whole project, the whole goal, or the whole challenge, and suddenly it feels enormous. But meaningful progress is rarely built through giant leaps. More often than not, it's built through consistent steps. So instead of looking at it like, how can I finish all of this? We're going to try asking ourselves, what is the next action that genuinely moves this forward? Maybe that's just making one phone call, writing one page, taking one walk, starting a conversation, or making one decision. One step is enough. Momentum will start building itself once we take that single step to start. All right. The third practice today is an inward check-in. This is where we bring the body into the conversation, because many of us were taught to make decisions entirely from our thoughts, to just logic our way through our challenges. We analyze, rationalize, and debate, and while our thinking mind is incredibly valuable, it's not our only source of information. Our bodies are constantly providing feedback. So the next time you're facing a decision or trying to determine your next step, pause for a moment. Bring the question to mind, but don't analyze it or don't worry about wording it right. Just bring the situation to mind. Then simply notice what happens in your body. Do your shoulders tighten, your jaw clench, or your breath become shallow? That may be a signal from our body to take a step back and reassess. Or maybe something in you softens, your chest feels lighter, the breath will deepen naturally, or you get this sense of openness or possibility. That tells us something feels right. We're not looking for magical answers. We're simply learning to include the body's wisdom alongside our mind's analysis. Because when we stop relying solely on habit, fear, or autopilot reactions and begin listening inward as well, our decisions often become more balanced and more intentional. And there is science behind this too. Research continues to show strong connections between body awareness and emotional regulation. The more aware we become of our internal sensations, the better we become at recognizing stress responses, regulating emotions, and making thoughtful choices rather than purely reactive ones. In other words, awareness creates options, and the more we notice, the more choice we have. That is what mindfulness is about, not becoming perfect or maximizing every minute of every day. It's about creating enough awareness that we can choose our direction instead of being pulled along by whatever feels the loudest. And honestly, I think that is something incredibly empowering there. Because if movement and progress aren't the same thing, then maybe we don't need to do more. We simply need to become a little more intentional about where we are already placing our energy. Progress isn't hiding behind some massive life overhaul. It's just sitting there inside one conversation we've been avoiding, one decision we've been postponing, one first step we've been overthinking, and one small action that aligns with the direction we genuinely want to go. The good news is that meaningful change rarely asks us to have the entire path figured out. Most of the time, it simply asks us to take the next step we can clearly see. When we do that consistently, what once felt overwhelming starts to feel manageable, and what felt distant starts to feel possible. What felt stuck starts moving again, and remember, what we circulate grows. The more we circulate worry, the bigger worry becomes. The more we circulate distraction, the easier it is to stay distracted. But when we begin circulating intentional attention, intentional effort, and intentional action, those begin to grow too. So, as you move through this week, I'd like to invite you to carry one simple question with you. What would move better with a steadier breath? Not because the breath changes the situation, but because it changes how we can meet the situation. And sometimes that's the very thing that helps us to recognize the next right step. All right, friend. If this conversation resonated with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Thank you so much for sharing a piece of your day with me, friend. Stay present, stay kind to yourself, and I will see you soon.